Well guys, it's time to talk about this one, the big one, the one that I've referenced a few other times on this channel and a few other videos, but never gave it its own dedicated video. But since we're almost at the end of February and this is technically a love story, I guess the time is just right. Gone with the Wind. So Gone with the Wind came out in 1939 and is actually celebrating its 85th anniversary this year, so way to go movie. It was the highest grossing movie when it came out. It's still, I think, technically the highest grossing movie of all time, adjusted for inflation. And this is a big movie, and big in every sense of the word. It's big in scale, in scope, in years that it covers, in runtime. So it's basically a 4-hour period epic that takes place around the time of the Civil War, and it's just huge. I don't really know where to start with talking about a movie like this. It won 10 Academy Awards that year, beating out the likes of The Wizard of Oz, Of Mice and Men, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, all of these fantastic movies in their own right. And I've done videos on a lot of these other movies already, but Gone with the Wind was always a special one to me because I've always had a bit of animosity when it comes to this movie. I didn't really like it as a kid, not because I watched it and was completely bored by it or didn't get it. No, I never even saw this movie until I was a teenager, but I hated it since I was like maybe 5 years old because it was the movie that prevented The Wizard of Oz, my favorite movie of all time since I was maybe 2 years old, from winning all the Oscars that year. Like I said before, Gone with the Wind swept the Oscars, which meant The Wizard of Oz only won a couple, which still isn't too bad for The Wizard of Oz. But you know, as a little kid, I was obsessed with The Wizard of Oz. I'd watch all the bonus content and documentaries about the making of The Wizard of Oz, and I would keep hearing about this other movie that came out the same year that was just better than it in every way, and it just took all the Oscars and awards and accolades. And so from a very young age, I hated this movie until I finally saw it, and when I saw it, okay, maybe I've been a little too harsh on this movie all my life. It really is a fantastic piece of filmmaking. It really does deserve all the praise and accolades that it got at the time and over the years as a classic of American filmmaking. Producer David O. Selznick and director Victor Fleming worked together to create a surprisingly faithful adaptation of Margaret Mitchell's book, Gone with the Wind, that only came out a few years before the movie entered production and was already a #1 bestseller. And one of the reasons I postponed doing this video is because I wanted to read the original Margaret Mitchell novel first before I judged the movie, and especially given the controversies that have popped up in recent years surrounding this movie and its depiction of slavery and all the uncomfortable and ugly politics and realities that happened both while this movie was made and also at the time this movie is depicting. I wanted to read the original novel to, for one, understand the intent of this story. Why was this story written in the first place? Does it have racist intentions? Is it prejudiced in any way? And also just to figure out what was changed in adapting this brick of a book. It's a long book and it's a long movie, and the movie surprisingly is the abridged version of the book. So yeah, in that 4-hour runtime, they leave quite a bit out, which might be hard to believe given that we don't get a lot of 4-hour epics anymore unless you're Zack Snyder doing Justice League. But after reading the book, the pace of Gone with the Wind, the movie, is quite a brisk one. They really move through the stuff of the book pretty quickly and fairly accurately. It's actually not a bad adaptation. Yeah, things are tweaked and shortened and changed, and certain characters are omitted or lines are given to different characters for the sake of pacing. But really, aside from the several kids Scarlett has in the book versus just the one kid she gets in the movie, there is a surprising faithfulness to both the original intent of the book and just the plot and characters adapted from page to screen is all fairly accurate. And just like I talked about in my Forrest Gump video, this movie is way too long to give a play-by-play of every scene, every plot point. I'm not going to be going through this from beginning to end. But I guess I'll start by talking about the music in this movie, because the music here is done by Max Steiner, who you might recognize if you're familiar with any movie that came out around this time, because he did so many iconic scores from Casablanca to King Kong to, well, Gone with the Wind. And he is just a fantastic composer. The way he can use pre-existing music, like the French national anthem in Casablanca, for example, and work them into a score that works on a level that's both familiar, so when we hear the French national anthem, we think about France and Free France, but it also works on a level where the meaning behind those tunes also factors into the story, where the French national anthem is not just about freeing France, but it's about invaders that are coming at your borders and you're trying to kick them out, again, which seems to be a repeated instance in French history. But here he takes traditional Southern Dixie tunes that we associate with the Old South and the Civil War era, and he works them into the score at thematically appropriate points to pull us back into that time period, and also just feel the emotions that those songs stir up, whether positive or negative. Some of these songs are incredibly dated and racist, and this movie doesn't shy away from that. It doesn't try to cover it up. It just acknowledges, yeah, that's what these songs are, and that was the time period. But Max Steiner, of course, the great composer that he is, doesn't entirely rely on pre-made music. He has a lot of original stuff in here too. It's like the main Terra theme, which I guess has just become the de facto Gone with the Wind theme. It's a theme that actually, if you listen to it, it sounds like it's saying Gone with the Wind, and I don't think that's a coincidence given that it plays while the title card Gone with the Wind is rolling across the screen. But yeah, the original music in here is top notch, and he does the classic Hollywood thing of giving certain characters or locations or ideas leitmotifs that just pull us back to that concept, whatever it may be. And if you want to know how more modern composers get their ideas for scoring movies, like John Williams and Hans Zimmer and Alan Silvestri, they all listened to the scores by Max Steiner and his contemporaries, and that era of film composers, really the first generation of film composers, set the groundwork and the rules for film scoring that we still use today. And Gone with the Wind is such a beautiful and classic example of that. I had to highlight it here. But what is Gone with the Wind really about? Well, it's actually kind of a complicated question to answer, because on the surface, it's about this woman, Scarlett O'Hara. She's played by Vivien Leigh, and she's a teenager when the war breaks out, and from then on, her life completely changes. The whole Southern Belle routine no longer applies because the Old South is dead, the war does not go the way the Confederates thought it would, and now she just needs to survive by any means necessary. So really this story is a story of survival. And I've seen a lot of people much smarter than me try to put on different metaphorical interpretations for what survival means in the context of this story. And given that it takes place during the Civil War era, obviously it's a racially charged issue of what exactly is this story trying to promote survival for? Is it trying to encourage the survival of the institution of slavery? Is it trying to promote the survival of the Southern spirit and states' rights? Or is it just trying to promote survival on an individual basis embodied by the character of Scarlett O'Hara herself, and that person is faced with insurmountable odds that they can dig deep inside themselves and overcome that, whatever it may be. The book was written during the Great Depression, where many Americans were facing starvation on a daily basis, so it's no wonder this book took off and flew off the shelves when its central theme is the spirit to survive given insurmountable obstacles. So because of that, I do think the intent of both the book and the movie is not to make some statement about politics and slavery and certain opinions about the Civil War. What it really is primarily about is the human spirit. And that's really where this movie thrives, is in the characters. Yes, the set dressing and the costumes and the production value are all massive and impressive and big, but you will not be able to sit through this 4-hour movie if the characters are not as interesting and all over the place as these characters are. Like The Great Gatsby, these characters are mostly unlikable. You will be hard-pressed to find a character in Gone with the Wind that is virtuous, where you're like, yes, that is the kind of person I want to be, and you use them as a model. This is not the movie for you. Again, like The Great Gatsby, that story is full of very flawed and just unlikable people. Gone with the Wind is no different, and let's start with Scarlett O'Hara. Scarlett O'Hara is a Southern belle in every sense of the word, except underneath, she really isn't. But she is very comfortable in this life she has. She thinks that she can manipulate men, she's gonna get a husband, and when she finds out that the love of her life, or I guess more accurately, her schoolgirl crush, Ashley, is getting engaged to his cousin, which, yeah, that's kind of weird too. And if you want to read too deep into that the main person who represents the Old South is in an incestuous relationship with his cousin, their family is very focused on breeding and keeping bloodlines pure, well, yeah, I'd say that's a pretty fair representation of the Old South. But before she can really cope with that rejection, the war breaks out and her beloved Ashley is called off to war, and kind of out of spite she marries this other guy, Charles Hamilton, who's the brother of Ashley's wife Melanie. So in a sense, the person that Scarlett hates the most, Melanie, for stealing her Ashley away from her, is now her sister by marriage. So yeah, she didn't really think that one through all the way. And now we're in the midst of the American Civil War. Like I said, this movie moves at a brisk pace, even if it is 4 hours long. And for our characters who stayed home, who are mostly women, again, all the young, handsome guys all went out to the war to be heroes. They're staying home in life, kind of sucks. It's not great. Everyone's poor and miserable and in tattered rags. The northern blockade around the southeast is preventing goods from coming and going to Europe. And the only man that's above 15 and below 60 that keeps her company is Rhett Butler, played by Clark Gable. And Rhett Butler is, I guess, the Han Solo of this movie. He's the renegade, he's the blockade runner, he's the brave man. He's the one that actually takes his ship from Charleston to Europe, trying to keep supplies coming in to fuel the war effort. And you might think from the perspective of the South that that's a virtuous cause to fight for, and that maybe he does have some strength of moral character. No, he's only in it for the money. And you find out in the book that it's not even as dangerous as you might think at first, because he's friends with the Northerners. He stops at northern ports, helping to fuel both the north and south side of the war. So that's why he has so much success breaking through the barrier. And he even says in the movie that Rhett Butler is the only cause he knows, which is so in character with Han Solo in A New Hope, before he gains a heart and joins the cause. Rhett Butler is the prototype for that kind of character that we've seen replicated so many times over the years. And Clark Gable plays him perfectly. He's got this sly arrogance, but he's also very calculating and cunning, and you always know there's something going on behind his eyes. Everything he says has a double meaning, and Scarlett picks up on this instantly. She can always tell what he's thinking. Even when he's being polite, she knows that there's some biting remark under the surface that nobody else in Southern culture picks up on. But as we know from history, the South doesn't win the war, and it ends with Sherman marching his troops all through Atlanta, from Atlanta to the sea, and just burning everything in their path, which leads to the unconditional surrender of the South at Appomattox Courthouse, which then brings us into the era of Reconstruction. And if you thought that that means the binding up of old wounds where the North and South come back together again as one big happy family, that is not the case, neither in this movie nor in history. If anything, I think the resentments just got worse because the South saw the Northerners as occupiers and the Northerners saw the Southerners as rebels. And yeah, it was a pretty dark period in American history on both sides. Nobody was happy. And this movie doesn't sugarcoat that either. Again, this is from the Southern perspective, so we are going to see a lot of homeless Southerners coming back from the war, that their farms and plantations have been burned down, all their slaves have been freed, they don't have anybody to work the fields, and now they just have to dig deep and carry on. But for characters like Scarlett O'Hara, she had to dig deep, pull herself together, and rally her family and the few slaves that she did have left that actually opted to stay. And they made it through the year. But the movie also highlights that there's a lot of useless people like Ashley, that never had any real skills to begin with. They were the aristocracy. They were college-educated people. They didn't have to work a field or do any kind of menial labor because they just had their slaves do it for them. And given the new reality, he just can't seem to pull himself together. But that doesn't stop Scarlett from being in love with him. She's still going after him, pursuing him, even though he's happily married, he's got a kid. And after her first husband died in the war, she married a second husband so that she could pay the taxes on Tara because he had some money. She needed money. She marries Frank Kennedy, and boom, his money is her money. And then we come to the part of the movie that's probably the most controversial. And it's based off of the scene in the book where Scarlett rides home from work one day because she is a businesswoman now. She had to step up and fulfill what was a man's role because a lot of the men are just kind of useless and not equipped for this new reality. And on her way home, she goes by a shanty town. She gets assaulted. And in the book, it's clear that it was more of a sexual assault. And in the movie, is just kind of a generally, uncomfortable referencing sexual assault, but again, it's not explicit. This was 1939. They couldn't really show anything. But if you pick up on that vibe, you're not wrong. And you could probably guess what vigilante organization went out to rectify the situation, kill all the people that assaulted their woman. This is probably one of the bigger departures from the book, because in the movie, you don't really know what organization it was. Now, if you know anything about American history, you know exactly who it was, what's going on. And the book does make it very clear that, yeah, that's who it was. The movie doesn't explicitly say. I think that was a very smart choice, because while the men are out doing, their thing, all the women are huddled in this one house, and it's like a Hitchcock suspense film. You don't know what's going on. The viewer is as clueless as Scarlett is, but as the scene progresses and certain women say certain things that they probably shouldn't say, you start putting it together, you're like, oh my gosh, all these men, every man that Scarlett has ever known is now part of this group. And on top of that, Ashley is wounded, they have to cover that up, and her husband is dead, lying out on Decatur Road with a bullet in his head. And what I love is that the movie doesn't try to politicize the scene. It doesn't paint what these guys did as virtuous. It just shows that, yeah, this is the situation. It's ugly. These were the beliefs of the men at the time. And it just feels like a very honest and blunt representation of what would have happened. And that really is how I feel about this movie as a whole when it comes to its representations of black people and slavery and racism and racist characters. Because really every character in this movie is racist. And you can kind of assume that going in, knowing that it's a story about the Civil War era South. These people are not going to have 21st century opinions about the races. That's just not gonna happen. But it also doesn't frame everything in this propagandistic way where the South was right all along, everything these characters do is morally justified. That's not the kind of movie this is. The movie does have criticisms to levy against all of these Southerners because what they were doing, yeah, is not okay. If you want to prove that, just watch the D.W. Griffith film Birth of a Nation. That is an incredibly offensive, racist, horrible film that definitely treats the South as being morally virtuous and heroic during the Civil War, and that especially during the Reconstruction segments gets incredibly racist. And Gone with the Wind just simply isn't that. Birth of a Nation definitely had something to say about race, and that was the whole point of the film, and it's incredibly offensive and racist and horrible. And I don't encourage anybody actually watch the film, but you should if you want to understand what a truly racist movie looks like. I just don't get the same vibe from Gone with the Wind that I get from that. Both depict the Civil War, both depict it from the Southern perspective, but Gone with the Wind feels a lot more honest and objective about what happened during the Civil War, even though it is historical fiction. The fact that Margaret Mitchell wrote these characters as flawed and unlikable as she did shows that we're not really supposed to be rooting for anybody, except maybe Scarlett, who despite all of her flaws and that she is an incredibly racist character, we do still respect her tenacity and perseverance and ability to dig deep and push through. And I can't believe I made it all this way without talking about Hattie McDaniel's award-winning portrayal as Mammy. And while her character may be seen as a racial stereotype, and on the surface it definitely seems like that, if you watch her performance for more than 2 seconds, you know that there is so much depth and gravitas to this character, where the Academy really had no choice but to award her Best Supporting Actress at a time when the Academy Awards were still segregated. She couldn't sit with her white co-stars when she accepted that award, and she couldn't even attend the premiere of the film in Atlanta because Atlanta was also still segregated. But her performance is so emotional and vulnerable, and it's this one scene in particular that comes to mind. It's when Scarlett and Rhett's daughter had just died, and Rhett locked himself in his daughter's room, and Scarlett and him had this big fight, but we don't see any of the fight. What we see is Melanie coming over and Mammy greeting her at the door and filling her in on all these things that have happened since the little girl died, and the way she tells the story is with so much raw emotion and sobbing, where you really do feel the weight of this situation. Because again, this is 1939, they couldn't really show a lot of violence or domestic arguing. It was a very sanitized time of the movies, but what you could do is have a character deliver it all in exposition. And if it wasn't for Hattie McDaniel's performance, that whole monologue could have fallen so flat, where it just feels like, oh, these things happened and they couldn't actually show it because of the code, and they're just delivering it to us this way instead, and it could feel so lazy. But no, you buy every word that Mammy says in this monologue. You feel every heartbreak, every emotion, every time she talks about how Scarlett and Rhett hate each other, every new argument that she retells. You have the same reactions that Melanie is having hearing it for the first time. And this scene shows that the writers weren't just concerned with giving development to only the white characters. All the slaves and all the supporting black characters that are in this movie, which there are multiple, are given three-dimensional personalities beyond just what might be on paper stock slave archetypes. There's a surprising amount of depth and personality and character that these actors bring to these kind of thankless roles, and I think all of that just helps this movie age. And on top of that, the acting is phenomenal, the direction is phenomenal, the effects are phenomenal. Everything with this movie is firing on all cylinders. It is truly a one-of-a-kind movie. The kind of movie that will probably never be made again. I don't think Hollywood would ever remake this movie. But even if they did, I can't imagine anybody doing a better job than Victor Fleming and David O. Selznick. They really achieved something with this movie, and it's a movie that deserves to be seen over and over again. There's something I pick up on every time I watch it. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Gone with the Wind? Have you seen it? Is it too long for you? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. As always, I'm Colby. This is my Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.